Welcome to the Juras-Sick Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. My name's Ryan Rogers and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Welcome to episode 68, The Badlands, recorded on July 3rd, 2024. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, Snale. You can check out his incredible albums on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today's intro is from Maybe Days, from Snail's second album, Charlemagne, and the outro is Atom Age Vampire, Cat in the Brain, from his self-titled debut album, Snail. A note, terrific guest and Snail rocker Christoph Oakes told me himself the name of this second song was a double homage to two independent gore flicks. The first is a film also named Atom Age Vampire, which I watched and it was alright. The other is Cat in the Brain, and guys, I don't know if I recommend Cat in the Brain, but it is on Tubi, the streaming service, the most popular streaming service in the US. You can check it out. I have no words, just none. There's a main character, there is a plot, there's a conflict. It's all very clearly laid out. It's easy to follow, but still, I just don't know what there is to say other than if you think you've got what it takes, go see for yourself. My goodness. I smiled at the end. I'm proud to say I've seen it. And maybe you will be too. Who knows? Cat in the Brain. Hey. All right, some corrections. I promised Dr. Mark A. Lowen, my guest from last week, that I wouldn't get his name wrong. But my throat was a bit dry, and upon hearing back the last episode, I may have mispronounced it, which I don't mean to do. Dr. Lowen, you were a terrific guest. Thank you for coming on the show, and I want to let you know I learned a lot. Thank you so much. All right, dinosaur news. The first is an article from the journal Nature called A New Stegosaur from the Middle Jurassic of Gansu Province, China, published July 2nd, 2024. Due to a poor fossil record, the iconic stegosaurs aren't well understood when it comes to their evolutionary history. This paper describes the Baiyinosaurus baojiensis, discovered from the Middle Jurassic aged Wanjishan Formation of Gansu Province in China. Baiyinosaurus is known from its holotype specimen IVPG D021, housed at the Institute of Vertebrate Paleontology, Gansu Agricultural University. It's comprised of a partial skeleton including a partial cranium, one cervical vertebra, 7 dorsal vertebrae, and 1 caudal vertebra. The paper says, quote, the features on the frontal and vertebrae of Baiyinosaurus are reminiscent of basally branching thyreophorans, indicating that Baiyinosaurus is transitional in morphology between early thyreophorans and early diverging stegosaurs. Systematic analysis shows that Baiyinosaurus is an early diverging stegosaur. Named the Baiyin lizard from Baojishan Basin, the authors honor the city Baiyin and Baoji Basin from which the remains were discovered. It represents, quote, one of the earliest records of Stegosauria, says the paper. Quote, systematic analysis shows that Baiyinosaurus is an early diverging stegosaur close to Isobarysaura, Alcovosaurus, Zhangjunosaurus, and Gigantospinosaurus. If this were a basal stegosaurian dinosaur, it would appear something like the Scutellosaurus, about 5 feet long, herbivorous, with a slim build, in a 4-legged posture, but likely with the ability to walk on the hind feet, if necessary, perhaps aided by a very long tail, and featured osteoderms of some nature all along its back. Furthermore, quote, the increasing diversity of Middle Jurassic stegosaurs that also occupy early diverging positions indicates that it is likely that stegosaurs split from their sister taxon, the Ankylosaurs, early in the Middle Jurassic, or even much earlier. All right, the second news story is a new late Triassic sauropodomorph dinosaur from the mid-Zambezi Basin, Zimbabwe, published in the Acta Paleontologica Polonica, April 10th, 2024. The authors named a new sauropodomorph from the Norian age of the Triassic, Musanqua ceyadiensis, found in the Upper Karoo group of Zimbabwe. Quote, the holotype consists of a right femur, tibia, and astragalus, and can be distinguished from all other late Triassic Masopodon sauropodomorphs on the basis of numerous features which form a unique combination. Furthermore, quote, phylogenetic analysis recovers the new taxon as the earliest branching lineage within Masopoda. Musanqua is only the 4th dinosaur to be named from the Karoo-aged basins of Zimbabwe and further demonstrates the high potential of this region for discoveries of new early dinosaur material. Named for the Sanyati River, whose original course is now submerged in the Sanyati Basin of Lake Kariba, The holotype NHMZ2521 is comprised of a partial right hind limb consisting of a complete femur, tibia, astragalus, with associated intermediate bone fragments. The fossils are housed at the Natural History Museum of Zimbabwe and were excavated from the Pebbly Arcos Formation. The phylogenetic analysis machine recovers Musankwa as the, quote, earliest branching massapodon sauropodomorph, and it shares some features with Riojasaurids that might prove to be of further interest if more material comes to light, says the authors. This is the fourth dinosaur to be named from the Karo-aged basins of Zimbabwe, and it demonstrates, quote, the potential for further significant discoveries in the region. Although the material of Musankwa is limited, it offers some insights into early massapodon evolution. Quote, given the early diverging positions of Musankwa and Riojasaurids within Massapoda, it is tempting to speculate that Massapoda had its origin in Gondwana, as all these taxa are either from southern Africa or South America. However, the lack of resolution outside Massapoda makes it difficult to establish their ancestral area with certainty. So as a massapodon, this would be a very big, long-necked, thick and lengthy animal that could raise up on its two legs and use its hands or front paws for tasks beyond walking, whatever tasks those might be, I don't know. But as a very basal member, this is a representative whose features are going to derive further back to that ancestral early animal that was closer to the earliest dinosaur, whatever that may have been as well. But Musankwa isn't necessarily a one-of-a-kind discovery. It is in fact quite similar to other early sauropodomorphs. Quote, it potentially is noteworthy that the limited material of Musankwa is strikingly similar to Riojasaurus and Euchnemisaurus, with all three of these taxa sharing the same overall gestalt and possessing several unusual features in common. It is tempting to speculate that these taxa might form a clade of Norian-aged Gondwana taxa, but the discovery of more complete specimens of Musankwa is necessary to test this hypothesis, say the authors. So the authors are tempted to erect a new clade of sauropodomorphs that all feature these similar features because they represent a distinct family of sauropodomorphs, but they are presently erring on the side of caution from doing so until more fossils support such an action. All right, with the corrections in the dinosaur news out of the way, please let me introduce you to my special guest this episode. All right, I am pleased to welcome my terrific guest, who you'll remember from episode 39, Lex. It's the aptly named Tom Fishenden, also widely regarded as Tom Jurassic. Tom is a content creator for the Jurassic community who appears on the Jurassic Park-Cast, creates tons of fun content, photography, reviews, and is the executive producer, if that's the right word, of the fan-made and fan-fueled audio drama Tales from a Jurassic World, which is in the midst of its second season, broadcasting over YouTube as we speak. Thanks for coming back to the show. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me back, and thank you for that introduction. I sit there and I'm like, yeah, I do those things. Yeah, I don't understand how I do all those things, but I do those things.
Well, you do because you love to do it, and I think you make time for it because it's something you love. So
yes,
that's what people do.
Definitely.
So we are connecting. It is July 3rd, which is kind of between July 1st and July 4th. Technically speaking, accurately speaking, July 1st is Canada Day here in Canada. We celebrate.
Cool.
We celebrate Canada becoming a nation with fireworks, and then the 4th of July is a more famous holiday, of course, around the world, where the U.S. celebrates their independence as well.
It's famous in the UK this year as well, because this year it's election day in the UK. So
you guys have an election tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh wow! I was gonna say, what do the British celebrate in July?
I mean, hopefully this month it will be a new government.
Oh my goodness. I've kind of come to the idea that, I mean, we probably don't want to get into geopolitics too deeply, but I think the age of, like, phew, thank goodness for that election is over. Like, we're never going to be happy with any election ever again. They would, anywhere in the world, I think we can agree as a globe government.
It's just going to be a constant ongoing, okay, this is where we are.
Until the next time, yeah.
Yeah.
So I could have looked it up, but I thought maybe I'd be happier to be surprised. What are some of the good or fun British holidays that people get a day off for in England?
That is an interesting.
Do you have like a Britain Day or an England Day?
I don't think we do. Yeah, I'm thinking now, and I'm like, do you know what? I feel like. I mean, we have bank holidays, which are like days where the banks close and then you have a day off.
Phew, what a day.
And they,
But fireworks and everything for that.
They're like, some of them tie into specific events. So I So interestingly, the closest thing you'd have to kind of like I suppose an England Day is St George's Day, which celebrates the saint in England that was meant to have fought off a dragon.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mythology there.
Sure.
But that's not a bank holiday. The bank holidays are just kind of spaced out across the year. So you have like two in May, you have I think one in April around when Easter is, and then you have a couple of others, and it kind of feels like they're just spaced out. So it's like, oh, people are probably tired at this point, let's give them a break, and then there's like a bank holiday.
We got a new holiday a couple of years ago called Family Day, which is built on that exact premise.
Oh, cool.
April, we don't have, I think it's April. It's so new, I'm not really familiar with it. But and it's by that I mean it's probably 10 or 15 years old. But
yeah,
but I think it's.
So for me, I was going to say I went freelance in November, so I just work through bank holidays anyway. So I've lost track of whenever these event days are, because to me it's like, oh, it's a day I'm going to decide to work today.
Well, I'm glad you're here. In terms of speaking about interesting dates, I came up with a couple that have always been in my mind for no really good reason, but most of them have to do with England or Jurassic Park. And so maybe I'll play these out and we'll see if they mean anything actually to British people or not. So one is June 11th. That after Jurassic Park came out, June 11th has always been in my mind. Whenever it comes around, I go, oh, yeah, June 11th. It's just significant because that was a day that it came out and it was kind of like on all the posters, and I just remember being so enthused with it that I'll never forget just June 11th. That's one of those things that will never leave my mind however I see fit. The others are all from my Survey of English Literature course back in 2002 or something like that. So one is the date 1066. Does that mean anything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so 1066 is when Norman the Conqueror came across to the UK and defeated Harold Saxon at the Battle of Hastings.
Yeah, the Norman invasion.
I live about an hour from Hastings, so I'm fairly sure I went on a school trip there when I was younger.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't tell you what happened in Canada any date of any year, but 1066, I'll tell you about that Norman invasion. The other, 1612.
Interesting. If I was a betting man, I'd say possibly Great Fire of London.
So I think that was 1666.
Ah.
I think. I didn't double check any of this. This is just off the top of my head. I think 1612 has something to do with Shakespeare. I don't know if he was born or died that day. I don't know.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that does not ring a bell for me, but it could be his birth.
And then I think 1666 was the Great Fire because I remember the 666s in there.
Yeah.
I think
that's an interesting coincidence, isn't it? 666 and
it was
everything
fated.
down.
It was very fated.
Yeah.
And then I think, is that when London Bridge fell?
It might have been, possibly.
And then we got the song, the nursery rhyme, the children.
Yeah.
Everybody never forget. We'll all sing this song and then we'll crash our. Okay, little ones. Okay, so those are just the dates that come to mind as we enter into this conversation through holidays. So I wanted to obviously have you on because you are in the throes or in the midst of your second season of Tales from a Jurassic World. When we last spoke, I don't know if it had started yet. I think we spoke in December 2022, and you were talking about it coming out. I think a bunch of them, one of them in particular, I remember you talking about how, like, what would you do if you came across a dinosaur and it had been injured or it was sick, and what sort of emotions you go through when one were to pass away and you'd been connected with it, and you were describing that, and that episode came out later. It certainly hadn't been out at the time, and that's in the first season. And so anyhow, I don't know that any of it had been out yet, and so that was still something that was.
I don't think so.
In the hopper.
It was all June 2023 because it feels like it's aligned itself well. So it's ended up being Jurassic June releases for both seasons.
Okay.
So Season 2 I did originally plan to get out a bit before June, but then once Chaos Theory was announced as coming out at the end of May, I was kind of like, well, okay, we'll push for June then, and we'll continue the momentum after that. So it's interesting because, I think before we spoke, obviously, I was teasing that Ankylosaurus episode a little bit, but now it's out there. I think that's one of my favourite episodes because I think there's this idea that just like our relationship with animals in the real world, you can't always save an animal that's injured, and that's quite an emotional experience. So getting to think about what that looked like with a dinosaur was quite interesting.
Yeah, or like if your car breaks down, and I mean they're the same size.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I guess we just leave it here. I don't know. But I think that was a really special episode because at the end it does kind of open up into this broader, expanded universe where I think that there is an image provoked of I guess herds of open plains of dinosaurs and stuff like that, which had, I guess, prospered across North America. And so you have, you lose some, but it's maybe the end of when God closes a window, he opens a door or something like that. I don't know how the expression goes.
Well, it's interesting that you reference that parallel, because actually at the end of the episode that releases this week, there's a very similar scene. And that kind of sets the precedent for going forward. And it maybe answers some questions about the world in Dominion. So that it kind of, again, is about painting that broader idea of actually here's the world that we're now inhabiting. So in that case, it's the idea that actually, a lot of these animals have escaped Lockwood Manor, they've potentially escaped other places, and they're now kind of learning how to coexist. And then what comes after coexistence is a big plot thread that I think we will be playing into later this season and potentially in any future seasons as well.
Well, let me know if how I do in terms of recapping or summarizing the first season without spoiling it. So it feels like it was an experiment to look at how dinosaurs would left Lockwood's Manor after the end of Fallen Kingdom, and then it moves a few weeks or maybe months beyond that, following, it looks like, Agents Ben Morrison and Lucy Brown. Are they from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or had they been in that and then they went somewhere else, or?
So they are from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they are those agents from that agency throughout.
And then it feels like it goes up to about the Battle of Big Rock, which is, I guess, pre-Dominion.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that kind of, that last episode features the Allosaurus from Big Rock. And the idea is that picks up moments after that short. So that encounter with the Nasutoceratops happens, this animal goes away into the woods, and then there just so happen to be Ben Morrison, Lucy Brown, and some federal agents in the area trying to track down that animal after that incident's happened.
And then they're like Ghostbusters, but instead of busting ghosts, they tranquilize wild dinosaurs, and they have a helicopter instead of Ecto-1, which is kind of handy, I suppose, when you're chasing things like that. Well, that's pretty cool. So the first season featured bioluminescent Parasaurolophuses, a rampaging Stygimoloch, or I guess it was tied up. I guess he was a tethered Stygimoloch.
He was tied up. I was just going to say to you, that Stygimoloch, I actually wrote that in mind as being the Stiggy that you see leaving Lockwood Manor. So you have a sequence in Fallen Kingdom where before any of the herd leaves the manor, there's a single Stygimoloch that runs away into the distance. And in my mind, that Stygimoloch is the Stygimoloch at the petrol station.
Sure. Well, there couldn't be too many other Stygimolochs running around. I don't know. Probably not. You've got Dilophosaurus being trafficked in the black market. It looks like there was Pteranodons swarming. Obviously, the emotional Ankylosaur meeting, and a finale against a formidable Allosaurus. So that was a big season in terms of like an exercise in creativity, in terms of storytelling. But then also there's, for anybody who hasn't checked it out, the audio engineering that you put into getting the sound design and the animal voices, and then I understand you have somebody scoring it as well, and then there's a ton of voice actors and assembling it all together and putting it into a breezy listen. It's must be rewarding to watch it all come together, because I imagine it's like grabbing bits and pieces from all over and making it into a unified document that doesn't sound like Bumblebee talking out of a Transformers movie is impressive in a way.
It's a really interesting process, because I think the vocal recordings especially are the thing I have the least control over. So there's some people who are voice actors. So Ashley, for example, who plays Lucy Brown, she does voiceover work anyway, so she has a professional setup at home. But then there's been people who have set up like mobile phones in a cupboard to do their recording, or they've set other things up. So it's really interesting kind of bringing that together and trying to make it a coherent listening experience for people. And then the sound effects is really interesting because I use a website called Epidemic Sound. So you can pay for like a year subscription to it, and they have a massive audio library. And some of the sound effects that I end up using for things are not what you would think at all. Like I've used like cars for other things. I've used really weird household objects that maybe sound like a gun or that kind of thing. It's interesting getting creative with it, because I think when you don't have the visuals, you're so much more sucked into the immersion of that world that it all needs to sound right. And if something doesn't sound right, it's really easy for it to pull you out of that experience. So that's really interesting. And to touch briefly on the scoring as well, Brooks did such a good job with that, but I'm sure we'll talk about season 2 more later in this recording. But I really had a challenge with season 2 because Brooks was only available to score one of the episodes. So that again has brought, for me, a whole new level of learning with this production, actually, because suddenly I've had to work out how to use existing Jurassic music and make it fit the emotional beats of scenes without music being written specifically for them. So that's been a huge challenge in itself. So there's a lot of work. I don't know why I do it when I don't get paid for it, but apparently I enjoy doing it because I keep putting myself through it.
Well, here's a tip. You can always use the record scratch. Great! You might have wondered how I wound up in this situation. That's a go-to if you're ever stuck. We're out of sound here. We'll just that's interesting. I can only imagine you like lurching around the apartment trying to make make it sound like a dinosaur is walking by.
Well, there's one sound effect that I recorded for the show, and I'll go and grab it quickly. So for audio listeners, this isn't a particularly great experience right now, but there is a really fun tidbit of information, which is there is one recording in the show that is actually recorded by me, and that is this, which is the Jurassic World Dominion dart blaster that they released. And if I do it,
people can't see it. It's a great big yellow looking Nerf assault weapon.
a lovely Jurassic World Dominion logo on the side, and this is the actual sound that I use for the tranquilizer rifles.
Okay, right on.
Yeah, so that's a little tidbit, because I just thought it would be really fun to actually use the real world dart blaster that they made for the tranquilizer rifle in the show. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that.
That's awesome. And authentic. There you go. It's got
yeah.
Well, I gotta tell you,
it's just me imagining shooting a dinosaur while I'm doing the sound effects for it.
So I have to tell you, I'm very partial to audio dramas. First, we have this radio station here still, but I mean, when I was a kid, it was called 104.5 Chum FM, and they had a program on Sunday nights called the Sunday Funnies. And it was when they had George Carlin and Jeff Foxworthy, but that was the only time of day where they would have some Adam Sandler songs. If Weird Al had something out, that would be where you would hear it. And then after that, because you put that on, that'd be fun. It was just your Sunday evening. After that was something called Theater of the Mind, and it had audio dramas. It had old clippings of Dragnet, and it had a bunch of stuff. There's a Green Hornet, and I remember there was the Shadow. And they were terrific. You would just sound like people walking around and opening and closing doors and stuff like that, and cars driving by. But then just the facts, man, nothing but the facts. And it was terrific. And you'd lie in bed until you fell asleep, just listening to those things. And so I was really partial to that. But my appetite for this goes back to beyond. We had books on tape, and so you would get we had all these Disney ones with Mickey Mouse or Aesop's Fables, and you put a cassette in the radio player, and it would and you'd turn the book and pages and stuff like that and read along with you. But the first ones that I had was something called Dinosaur World, and it was by a guy named Jeffrey T. Williams, and it was from 1985. So I don't know, I couldn't have been too old when I was reading it. And it's about this girl, Mary McDunn, and she takes her dad to Dinosaur World, and it's like visiting a zoo, and the dinosaurs fight each other to the death just while you watch. And it's full of incredible stuff, but the sound effects are amazing. It's just the best. And
Cool.
the Hadrosaurus were like loud and honky. The sauropods are huge and they're in swamps. And the Tyrannosaur and Triceratops face off in like this gnashing of teeth. And the whole thing is just perfect. It's just perfect. The sound, everything about it is amazing. And I literally think that I learned how to read by listening to that book and comparing the word when the tape wasn't on, matching the words that I could remember with the words on the page. And it makes a good story anyhow. Let's say that's how I learned how to read. In any case.
That's so cool. I like that.
And I think that guy actually sued Michael Crichton unsuccessfully for... but I don't want to take away from how wonderful those books were. And I think you can still find them. They're really cool. Dinosaur World, I think it's called like Lost in Dinosaur World or something like that. They're just the best.
Yeah.
So I'm very partial, and I think that what you're doing is... really wonderful exercise in putting those things together. I always thought it'd be a lot of fun to do, those kinds of.
It's so much fun,
yeah.
And it's interesting hearing you talking about your inspiration, because there's a few different points of inspiration on this for me. The main thing is Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, my family used to listen to the album of that all the time, and I went and saw the actual tour of the musical twice. And just the way that combined music with kind of narrated storytelling to me really sucked me in. It was kind of like a medium that I'd never really seen before. And then around the release of Halo 5 Guardians, Microsoft produced a series called Hunt the Truth, which was an audio drama following a journalist in the Halo universe, as they kind of like uncovered different things about the Master Chief and went through this whole process. And it kind of started off as just this journalist almost recording their thoughts with a bit of music, and then slowly transitioned more into that full audio drama. So I really enjoyed that. I kind of took that and wanted to do a Halo audio drama, which I produced, called Halo Survival. And then off the back of that, I got really into Jurassic. I kind of listened to the Audible original version of War of the Worlds that they did, which is more of an extended audiobook version with a lot more sound effects. And I kind of thought, okay, yeah, I want to do something Jurassic for this. And I think it's that kind of audio storytelling that really sucks me in. Like there's a new Audible original that came out recently, which has Andrew Garfield in it, which is 1984. Oh, wow. So it's a retelling of the George Orwell book. And it's just incredible. Right. Like the ambience that they craft in terms of pulling you into it, you can just lie there with your eyes shut and listen to it and just be sucked into that. And I think that's such a cool medium that's not particularly resource intensive. I'm never going to have an animatronic dinosaur to film with. I'm never going to have a cast of...
Oh, don't say never. You might. Come on.
Well, one day, maybe.
Maybe a small one.
But yeah, for now, while I don't have that, just being able to get voices is such a great way to still kind of craft that story. So it really appeals to me because it's almost storytelling on a budget, but you can do it well on a budget in this kind of format, and that's what I really enjoy.
Well, in terms of your inspirations, like I can't believe I overlooked, like, of course, War of the Worlds. I had one guest who was saying that they had Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World on audio that they enjoyed listening to. But I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the BBC produced in audio before it was ever anything beyond the book, I think. And I'm sure there is a tremendous amount of material that, you said 1984. Yeah. I think England has a long tradition of doing terrific stuff with that, so... No surprise.
Yeah, it's always been something that I think War of the Worlds is the biggest thing for me, and then that Halo audio drama as well. But I feel like audio has always been a storytelling medium that I've seen a fair bit of as I've been growing up, so it's always kind of quite inspired me, I think.
It reminds me, I was just watching a bit of the T-Rex attack in the first Jurassic Park, and Grant grabs Lex and covers her mouth. He says, "Don't move." Yeah. As if covering her mouth is going to make her, like, being quiet means don't move or something like that. But they turn down the radio. I can't see. But nonetheless. And then when you go into season 2, so some of the storytelling, as we as we look into the season 2, I know that you mentioned Biosyn a little bit in the first season, but it sounds like in the second season that it is more prominent or playing a bigger role in terms of where the dinosaurs are going. You had, in the first season, I think, alluded to there being some sort of private enterprise, which is partnering with people who are trying to make sure there's a safe place for the dinosaurs. And initially, they were going to like some place in Pennsylvania, like an airstrip, but beyond a permanent solution. But the more permanent solution is going to be this Dominion-esque sort of dome where everybody winds up. But so you begin to incorporate the Lew Dodgson, I guess, era of what Jurassic Park does. When you started building into the second season, what were some of the things, points that you wanted to hit on, I guess, early in the season to show people what that was coming up?
Yeah, so I'm gonna blow your mind here, Ryan, and I'm gonna potentially blow listeners' minds a little bit. But Tales from its inception wasn't just one season. So I've spoken about this a little bit in different places, but Tales essentially has always been a 3-season arc. So whether we get to a third season or not, I've always had 3 seasons in mind, and I've kind of known from the start where I wanted it to go. So in Dominion, in that opening what's now news cutscene, you get this real sense that Biosyn has got this big presence. You see this huge corporate building, you see fences wrapped around this facility. Obviously, you have the facility in the Dolomites in that film as well. You get this sense that they're a big organisation and a big entity, but we haven't seen Biosyn since the first Jurassic Park film. So what I really wanted to do was give kind of a sense of that growth. So the first season was always about showing, okay, the US Fish and Wildlife Service initially are going to try and deal with this, but it's too much for them to deal with. When do Biosyn take advantage of that? And when do they decide that now is the time to come in? And then the second season is really kind of about that proliferation of their power. So now they're taking control. How does that shape operations? How does that shape the dynamic that Morrison and Brown have had in the past? Because they're going to have to deal with these things in really different ways. And also, what does that mean going forward? You know, if this company is the company that's in charge of looking after dinosaurs, are they doing it for the right reasons? Or are there more motivations at play that perhaps we don't see initially? So for me, it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of build on that and bridge that sort of gap a bit. And without spoiling it, because I don't know if you've seen it, I was really excited that this season especially still has managed to work alongside Chaos Theory. So there's some tweaks I'm going to make for the third season if we get there, just to make it feel a little bit more coherent. But so far, it all feels like it's heading in the same direction, which is quite cool. And
I'm really excited. The third season is a full-scale animatronic season, which is going to be excellent.
Oh, God. I mean, you know, if you're funding that, go ahead.
I was wondering about, so they made Jurassic Park for something, a couple $100 million. If you ever had that, would you get a full-scale Tyrannosaur?
It's an interesting question. This is just going on a bit of a tangent, but I know that Jurassic Park, when I interviewed the VFX director, Ty Ruben Ellingson, he made a point of saying that film makes a conceited effort to use darkness when the dinosaurs come out, so you don't have to have as much of them on screen, and it means that you get a lot more out of your budget when it comes to CGI and using the animatronics, because you don't have to build as much of them. So that, for example, if you take a sequence like, say, the Dilophosaurus in the underground parking lot in episode 3 of season 1, you could just build the head of the Dilophosaurus and have the rest of it in shadow. There's ways to get around that, which I think is quite cool, because that then comes into the creative filmmaking, right? And how do you give the sense of this massive creature, even if you maybe just have the head of the creature?
Yeah, well, I mean, before we were all dressed in green leotards to do our green screening, the puppeteering 101 was you put on a black leotard and then turn the lights down.
Yes.
That was, how far we've come, you know?
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to get to about season 2, which I really appreciated, I thought was going really well, we know he was Tom Fishenden, and then popularly as Tom Jurassic. But with all the breach teams and FBI agents and collaborations between squads to get in and infiltrate mafias and stuff like that, you could be Tom Clancy. So I had to say, without spoiling the season, which I don't want to do. There's a lot of excellent and exciting stuff. It must be a lot of fun to build these dynamic action sequences where people are rushing in, all the boots on the ground and stuff like that, and the guns clicking, even if they're just tranquilizers. There's a lot of exciting special weapons and tactics that goes into the writing. It's not just running from dinosaurs. Almost, I mean, except for when a bullet ricochets and unlocks a cage. I mean, but other than that, they got to get out somehow.
Exactly. I mean, I have so much fun writing that kind of stuff in, because I really enjoyed the action genre. So I've been really into kind of military television shows for ages. One of my favourite shows when I was growing up was a show called Strike Back, which follows two special forces operatives as they go on a variety of different missions. And actually, as I look at getting more into a writing career in the future, well, one of the stories I really want to write is a story. It's all about kind of a special forces unit that uncovers this big plot in the UK. So that's kind of always been something I enjoy. You know, I've grown up with Call of Duty, I've grown up with military films, military television, and for me it's kind of exciting to think about how does that work in the context of Jurassic, because I think with a lot of the history of the franchise, like say the John Sayles script, for example, that takes military to an extreme. So you have military trained velociraptors. I'm not interested in that, but what I think is really compelling, I suppose, is what do these kind of scenarios look like where you have somebody who is highly trained to deal with fighting another person, and then suddenly they're fighting another creature that they've never encountered instead. You know, that sequence in Jurassic World with the InGen mercenaries is a perfect example. You have those helmet cams, you have that tactical feel with the lasers, and you slowly see them getting picked off one by one, and I think that's almost Jurassic's equivalent to like Aliens in a way, right? With the colonial marines against the xenomorph. So I just really like kind of pulling from that and taking that kind of militaristic parallel, because I think if you have military characters being defeated by these creatures, it gives you a real tangible sense for just how dangerous they are.
There's something in terms of using your imagination that Dinosaur challenges people with, in terms of the scale of a dinosaur is almost unfathomable. When we think about like a Clydesdale horse or a large horse, they obliterate people if they're in the way, and that is a pittance compared to many dinosaurs. When we're talking multiple tons, it is unfathomable to think of what it may be to bump into it. Or if it were just walking by, let alone whether or not it is fleeing or crashing into something or just falling over.
I mean, so perfect example of that, right? We had the Titanosaur exhibit at the Natural History Museum not that long ago, and me and my friends went to that. And what we always say whenever we're looking at dinosaur skeletons is you look at that massive size is just the skeleton, right? So there's no muscle on that, there's no tissue, there's no skin. And when you start to think about all of that, your mind just kind of goes, wow, these are almost imperceivable how large these animals were.
But yeah, like even in like a hadrosaur's tail, right? No clubs, no spikes that we know of. There's nothing especially formidable about that, other than it would be like being hit by a truck. If it were to swing at you, it would be a couple tons, and that'd be just unbelievable. It'd be like being hit by a car. Just it's really challenging, because we'll watch in like Dominion and Chris Pratt will just lasso a Parasaurolophus and just stop it.
I mean, put it this way, there's definitely some traits that have been seen in the Jurassic World era that I've tried to not mimic in my writing.
But why not? Is it not inauthentic to not put in these?
It's an interesting question. I think for me it's just about it feeling realistic and grounded, right? And I think whenever you're dealing with something as large as a dinosaur, it's going to be challenging, it's going to be destructive, and you just need to reflect that. I think having Chris Pratt capturing a Parasaurolophus, I nearly said baryonyx, I don't know why, but capturing a Parasaurolophus with a lasso is great.
He's got two hands, he could catch the other.
Or is he just going to get launched flying into like the side of the mountain when he tries?
Unbelievable. Like I had a dog when I was a kid. It was a German Shepherd crossed Doberman, and it was mild tempered, but it's still, shepherd-esque sized dog. And I had a buddy Mike who was sitting on a rock. The leash was wrapped around him, and the dog saw a squirrel and chased the squirrel and spun him like a top. He went flying. And that's just, we're talking a dog. Dog's 60 pounds?
Exactly.
Like, unfathomable. So anyhow, the scope of dealing with something that is so big is an exercise in imagination that I don't know that a lot of screenwriters bother with. and because it just changes, mundane little things become unbelievable in terms of just like the scope of how big they get. So in the latest episode that came out, we're talking this July 3rd, right? And so the new one's coming very soon, but the last one that came out, there is a Carnotaurus that is in there.
Actually, recording this has reminded me that I need to go and set the new episode as a premiere, so I'm going to be doing that straight after this.
Well, I won't let you forget. But yeah, it looks like it's you brought in that character from Camp Cretaceous. That Carnotaurus seems to be described as the one that is, they call it Toro, is that correct? In Camp Cretaceous, and it sort of was a villain. Was it also I'm trying to remember. It was a good guy, it was a bad guy, it was a dinosaur.
It is, it's an animal doing animal things, right?
Yeah. So it begs a question: have you decided to put this brain control on dinosaurs yet in the show? Wouldn't that be the easier way to?
No.
Yeah.
So what I really wanted to do, so with both this episode and the episode before, where you have the Nothosaurus from Camp Cretaceous, I really wanted to pay homage to that sort of element of the franchise, because I think whether you enjoyed Camp Cretaceous or not, that is part of the canon here, and those animals are going to be out in the world just like with any other creature, right? There might be a Monolophosaurus out there somewhere. Equally, we know Bumpy is out there somewhere, so that kind of just it felt like a natural way to really connect this, and also I think sort of say to people that actually the most important thing for me with this entire production is that it feels like it could be canon. So even though it's not, because sadly I don't work for Universal, if you're listening, please call me. But
not with the cease and desist. Not with that.
No, not with that. No.
Don't call me if that's what you have.
I want it to kind of feel coherent for people, right? So they could go away and watch that show and then listen to this audio drama and think, hey, that's really cool. That's that character from the show. Same with some of the characters from the films as well. So in this episode as well, and you might be planning to mention this, but we have Anton Orlov, who is the character from the Lockwood Manor auction in Fallen Kingdom, who's the Russian who wants the carnivores. And for me, it's about putting those little nods in so people get this sense of interconnectivity, right? It really, I think for me, comes from growing up with the early days of the MCU, when everything felt connected, you know, everything felt like it had significance. It felt like you'd see Agent Coulson pop up in every other film. It was just all those little bits of connective tissue that I think makes that experience so much more immersive. And that's why I think in that universe, Infinity War was so impactful for people, because you'd been with these characters throughout that entire experience. And that's kind of what I want people to get from Tales. I want it to feel like it's connected to this universe in a way that's quite logical and feels quite immersive for people.
Well, and I like what's important about having an expanded universe, or at least an expanded universe in mind, is that it shows that people are bothering to think about the ramifications of things, as opposed to when you catch some films, it's like, wow, I wish they just spent some time thinking when they wrote that, because a little bit of thinking might have gone a long ways there, bud. Well, the Toro, I don't recall if it was the Mafia was employing the Carnotaurus, or they were just looking to market the Carnotaurus, but I felt a connection with it in this way. I spent a couple years living in Windsor, Ontario, not the good Windsor, but we don't have a Duchess in Windsor, Ontario, but it's right close to the Detroit River, and across the river is Detroit, Michigan, and the Detroit Zoo we would visit on occasion. I remember they had, I remember reading a sign, and I had to double check this, because this sounds like a fact that I should get right. They have lions that were rescued from drug dens and crack houses in Detroit that have been liberated from these places and are now, or at least were, I don't know if they're alive still, but they were captured or rescued in 1992. They've got these lions, and that's where they're living now, is at the zoo. So they didn't buy these lions. They've acquired them from crackdens where people, I guess, had been using them as like guard dogs, which, I mean, you don't hear about too often. But to think that the mafia might have been, fetching a dinosaur to do this sort of thing, keep the feds from knocking on the door, it would be kind of interesting. So that knocked a...
Well, it hints at that darker side, doesn't it? And you literally have that sentence from Anton in Fallen Kingdom where he says he's in... Or no, he doesn't say it. Gunnar Eversole says that he's looking for a couple of carnivores. And I just think that is so ominous, right? Because when you think about somebody in the mafia... Why would you pay, say, a gunman to do a hit on someone, where if a dinosaur eats them, there's no evidence that they were ever taken out? It's kind of that darker side of Jurassic that I don't think the franchise leans into, but it's implicit. And that's what I like, right? Because in this episode, equally, I leave it pretty vague, right? You know that Anton has got Toro in this warehouse at this point in time. He's potentially looking at moving him, but what he's going to be doing with this Carnotaurus, you never find out. And I think that kind of, again, to the point of being immersive and engaging in storytelling, like we're kind of saying here with our mafia using lions, that makes people draw comparison. It makes them think about the story and kind of get so much more invested in it because their imagination begins to run wild with those possibilities. And I think it's really special if you can kind of have that impact on people through the story.
Well, yeah, mission accomplished.
Yes.
So,
whoa.
This show has been, it looks like, an opportunity to collaborate with Jurassic Park fans. How has the community rallied around your show to help you put it together? Yeah. And what are some of the things perhaps you learned in season 1 that helped you in terms of building season 2 when you're putting it together?
Yeah, so in terms of the community side of it, I always say this to people. This show isn't, as much as I call it my baby, this show is not just about me. It's about the community. It's a whole community effort, right? As you'll know from being involved in it, there's so many different voice actors who contribute to it. Equally, Brooks with the audio, people who proofread the scripts for me, Sam Phillips and Swerve helped massively with that this time around. There's so many people who get behind it, and I think are just kind of invested in serialized storytelling within this franchise, right? People care about this franchise. They want more stories within it. And so that's where I think this is kind of that embodiment of the community wanting more Jurassic and wanting stories that they can connect with. So I'm just really grateful that people support it, that they listen to it, because at the end of the day, I'm one person with an idea, right? But the only reason that idea happens is because people are willing to get involved in it and get behind the project and make it a reality. In terms of learning from season 1, the biggest thing for me is kind of almost... It's weird, but I look at it as almost like a showrunner role, where my job is now kind of to look after a lot of other people who are doing different things. And the biggest thing I've learned is building sort of a lot of slack into timelines. So understanding that as a perfectionist, everything isn't going to be perfect, and that's okay. You just have to make sure you factor in mitigations for that, you allow extra time for things, and then you can work things out. So with the audio, for example, I would have loved if Brooks could compose every episode, but that didn't work out. But I made sure I built in mitigation time in case that was a factor, so then I was able to build those scores. So that's been a huge learning process for me, which I hope professionally as a creative, if I'm ever lucky enough to do this kind of work in more of a paid capacity, hopefully that has informed my ability to do that and to actually run projects like this efficiently.
Yeah, well, good lessons, life lessons that you can employ beyond, I'm sure. Some forgiveness and time management are things that can go a long way. So one of the features that are in, it seems almost every movie and every franchise that they love to use, and one that you have not yet, as far as I can tell, adapted into the show is the Wilhelm scream. When are we going to have somebody fall and scream in our favorite way?
So, to be fair, it's not something I had actually thought about, but I will write on a post-it note right now to put it in somewhere in season 3, just for you, Ryan. I will put it in somewhere.
And the animatronics, yes, okay. So you mentioned that you had Anton. Anton was a somebody that you had pulled out of the franchise and incorporated into your story.
Yes.
I didn't pick up on Anton. That was a little too deep for my comprehension. But Howard King does arrive, and
Yes.
he is somebody that I was more familiar with. So you have gone into the Lost World, and knowing that Spielberg looked at the second book and said, "I'm not going to use this," and they ignored everything that happened to our Biosyn team on Isla Sorna.
Yeah.
Instead, he's left them alive for everyone to enjoy. Spoiler alert if you haven't read the book. So, so his I guess, ignorance of those characters has been your gain. For them to continue to use Dodgson, I suppose, but at the same time, you were able to bring in, who was in the novel anyhow, Dodgson's right-hand man is Howard King.
Yes.
And Howard King appears, I believe, on Isla Sorna as well. What was it like to pick a character to use, and how did you come about saying, this is the guy I want, and thank goodness he's around to use?
Yeah, so it was an interesting process, because I always knew that at the end of season 1, Biosyn was going to appear in some capacity, and that there was going to be a character that appeared to kind of connect it to season 2 and to sort of start painting this broader picture. But what actually happened was I was rereading The Lost World, and when I was going through that, it kind of dawned on me just how many characters are in that story that have never been used in the films.
Mm-hmm.
So Gutierrez, I can't remember the other kid's name now, it slipped
Arby.
away from me.
Arby Benton.
Koepp, there we go.
Yeah.
So he never appears, right? You have obviously. Oh, my novel lore is not great. The other Doctor as well.
Is Levin?
Who goes to the island first? Yes.
Yeah.
So you
Richard
never
Levin.
get him, right? So there's Richard Levin. So there's so many characters in that novel that never appear anywhere in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was kind of reading through it, I thought, do you know what? Just having somebody that's recognisable as a Biosyn character will be such a cool reference for people who have read the novels. King in our story is still Dodgson's right-hand man, but he maybe has a little bit more agency and autonomy than he did in the book. But I think for people who have read that book, it's that satisfying moment of knowing that actually that is a character from the book who's now a part of this world as well. And I think that kind of speaks to the broader direction I'd like to see Jurassic go in, which is actually there is a lot of material from the novels that they haven't used at all yet. So it would be really cool to see them go back and actually pull some of that at different points in time. And I will just say to you, I have already had thoughts about what comes after this season.
Yeah.
So after this entire show, when we're doing standalone stories, and a particular character that could be followed in one of those.
Well, if you ever need, you got a good plan, everybody's ready to execute, it's going to work out, and you need like a Leroy Jenkins to just muff it all up.
Yeah.
Richard Levin will just say, forget it, I'm going right in right now, guys. I'm a type A, and I'm not listening to anybody. So you can keep that in your pocket. He'll work out just fine if you choose there. But and going back to like even the original cast, I know that from the films, the Roland Tembo was never really picked up on. He could have been a fun guy to, we got dinosaurs in the wild. Finally. I mean, that's really what he wanted. And maybe if there was a real fiasco, we got to bring in a specialist or something like that. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
I know that I've joked before about how Tim Murphy is like the Sarah Connors of the Jurassic World, where it's like, I've seen what these things can do, and I'm waiting for Judgment Day. He's just, they'll get off the island, and I'll be ready. But Lex could have been like... He's been in a bunker.
Yeah,
he's been waiting this whole time in New Mexico, just waiting for them to show up, and I can't wait for them to come up from the Americas. And then Lex could have been like this hacker that got caught for cyber crimes, and she's just getting out of jail, and could be infiltrating Biosyn's operation. I don't know. There's all kinds of characters that would be
Lex
fun
could be
to work
working for the DPW, right? Or the DPG.
The NRA. She's been spying on... Not the NRA, the NSA? NSA.
The Dangerous Species Division.
Okay.
There we go. She's at the CIA. She's working with Franklin.
And she could be in there. And who's the other guy that would have been
That would have been such a cool cameo. That would have been insane.
Nick Van Owen. He was the kind of guy, he'll go in there with his bolt cutters and change the game real quick on people. I thought that's gonna be fun characters if you're in having the appetite to go and pull people out of there. That could be a lot of fun.
That could, yeah. I think that is kind of where I want to go. So like I said, I have a set idea for the story with Morrison and Brown and where those characters go, where they end up, what happens. But then after that, if I want to tell more stories, I think the whole reason I picked Tales from a Jurassic World is because it doesn't just have to be those characters. Like, it can be any story that's within that universe. So I could go back and do a story about Hamada at Jurassic World before Jurassic World fell, that kind of thing. There's just so much potential to tell stories within that space. Obviously, I'd like to ideally tell the stories officially one day, but I've kind of set myself up with a nice little platform if that never becomes possible.
Well, in terms of like creative writing, I know that in Jurassic Park itself, Crichton has a few moments where he changes tones. There's one when we were talking about, you were on the episode, Lex, that one scene is when Ed Regis gets attacked by the juvenile Tyrannosaur, and it's misty, and the Tyrannosaur attacks from the shadows, and the crickets and stuff like that all go quiet, and there's this haunting imagery that goes along that Crichton doesn't always use, but in that moment he did, and so he employed a different type of like ghost story sort of narrative, which he had employed also in the, if you remember at the beginning when the sick worker arrives at the Baiyinosaurus clinic, that is more of a horror story, more of a ghost story, more of a what is this hoopia that lives out on this island 100 miles offshore that steals children with, you know, the faceless vampire. So there's parts where he was telling not like this Indiana Jones chase, but instead this haunting imagery. And I think that when we were seeing the sick Ankylosaur, the terminally ill Ankylosaur, or seeing the breaching protocols, or even the wedding ceremony, where you have the drama, you know, between the groom and the co-worker, that there's an opportunity to do all kinds of different types of stories. And I think that must be exciting to not only have to, I mean, maybe you won't want to do a romance, but maybe you do. But for a guy like Spielberg to have made a movie like E.T., where a person falls in love and gets a strong connection with an other, so in this case, you know, literally an alien, to have a type of Black Beauty story with a dinosaur would be, I mean, ultimately it would be heartbreaking. That's how those stories always end. Because they can't give you a dog movie where they don't kill the dog. Thanks a lot. But there's one trope we could take out of Hollywood. It's the dog gets to live. But there's all kinds of stories that could be told, and I think it must be exciting to wrap up a season, or to, you know, have creative license to do whatever you wish. Really, I mean that must feel
definitely. I mean, if you just look at this second season, right, we go from that wedding episode to quite a dark horror episode with the Nothosaurus, and that's exactly what I kind of like doing, is having that switch up. So the next episode, you've had an action episode, and then the next episode, which you'll hear this Friday, is pretty light on the action. It's more about the broader world and the kind of optimism for it. And then, you know, you've heard season one, you know our finales tend to be quite big spectacle pieces, and that's the same again this time around. So for me, it's so much about dabbling with those different tones, and I think what Crichton does really well in his writing is he contrasts moments of hope and wonder with moments of terror, and that's something that I've really taken and I really enjoy using in my writing. So I mean, I know you saw earlier, I'm in the process of developing a dinosaur novel at the moment, and that's the exact same kind of thing, where I like those moments of wonder where you get to see these animals in certain environments, you get a sense for their kind of natural place in their world, essentially, and then you juxtapose that with, well, what are these animals like when they're acting on that animalistic instinct? And I think that's just such a cool way to kind of take a story from a beautiful dynamic and twist it to a terrifying one. And I like how, especially with Spielberg's writing, you never know when that's going to happen. So I always remember, I say always remember, I only listened to it recently, but one thing that really struck me with the Andromeda strain was when in the final moments one of the characters finally gets infected with the strain, and it twists so quickly to the point where you literally have like a minute by minute countdown, and I think they survive by the skin of their teeth. And just to go from this kind of quite mundane scientific thriller to suddenly, oh, we've got minutes until we all die, is just such fantastic elevation of stakes, and I really, really enjoy that, and I try to, I guess, convey that in my own storytelling because I think it's really appealing.
You make a good point, and then obviously you mentioned the book that you I don't know how much we talked about it, but I know that you've been tweeting about being part of
Yes.
a small movement, or I'm not sure what you would call it, but it's kind of, we have National Novel Writers Month in November. That has been circulating for years and years. This sounds like it could be something similar, but it's basically a community that comes together virtually that says, hey, let's all do something. Here's the impetus to do it. In terms of writing a book, in this case, is that something you wanted to tease about, or just...
Yeah. I can talk about it a little bit. I'm being very sort of cryptic with the details I put out there, just because I have the ambition to do a lot more with this book. So I'd really like for it to become a film. But essentially, what it is a story on a distant sci-fi planet where dinosaurs still exist. And when a spaceship goes missing on that planet, a team are sent to rescue them. They crash land on the planet and discover that there's more secrets to it than they could have imagined. And that is my kind of premise. I'm sort of pitching it as Avatar meets Jurassic Park, because it's got obviously the dinosaurs, the horror, the tension of Jurassic Park, and then kind of the sci-fi world building of Avatar.
Well, in that case, you need to make sure that the title, whatever it may be, also includes in 3D at the bottom. Then you're all set. Lost on a strange planet in 3D.
That version of it, yeah.
Well, that's excellent. Well, I know it's always a struggle to try and mash dinosaurs and people together to make a narrative. There's always, you need some device to make that work, and that's never an easy one to convince people of. But it sounds exciting.
It's been an interesting challenge, and I think what I like with it is the dinosaurs kind of fade into the story. So to start with, it's just about this planet, and then you kind of realize that the dinosaurs inhabit the planet.
That's cool. Well, I know that putting a mystery into the story is really would drive something forward, get people to go wonder, but also they get to, it's the same with like watching a crime show or something like that. You try and guess who is going to be the guy at the end and try and pick the pieces. But the mystery, I mean, Crichton did it all the time, and in Jurassic Park was no exception. There was always some mystery, like why this and why that, and it always teased you along to keep you, maybe it'll say on the next page. That's what drives you forward. You mentioned that you have Lucy Brown, who got married to Dan, although I presume not Dan Brown, but in terms of like mysteries that keep you turning the page, like the Da Vinci Code was built on like, how did I get through 300 pages already?
Yes.
Like, how did this even happen? But he's notorious for like a cliffhanger. Okay, is it on the next page and the next page? And they certainly tease you along with this. I guess it's just a tease, but the mystery is always there, and so that seems to be a real useful tool in terms of building
that's something that kind
narrative.
of unravels in the story I've been writing as well. So there's little hints that make you realise that the understanding of the planet that you're presented with at the start of the book isn't necessarily the full picture.
It was Earth all along. Damn you!
Yeah,
you blew it up.
Yeah, I've been commissioned to do the novelization of 65.
Wonderful. Well, we're flat out of time. But it's been wonderful having you back again. Continued success with season 2. It's been wonderful to watch it go along and to
thank you, Ryan.
Being invited to some of the behind the scenes things and stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. It's nice getting to talk about it as well, because I think a lot of the time with this show, it kind of goes out there into the wild, and we don't necessarily talk about the processes behind it. But what I'm really keen for people to just take away from this is that this show really is a community effort. Like I say, this is full of people who love dinosaurs and just want to tell awesome stories with them. So at the end of the day, it's for the community by the community, and I think everyone on the crew is so happy that people are enjoying it.
Well, I think there's a part of the creative process which is, I mean, it's obviously all intellectual and it's really mental, but there's also something intangibly kinetic about it, and you gotta get it out there.
I play with my dinosaurs, figuring stuff out sometimes,
and being able to share or talk or you got to do something physical about it, because the process does create potential energy that you got to release in some ways, and so I'm glad this helps in that respect, if that means anything.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's really awesome getting to talk about it a little bit more. It's why we did a behind the scenes season this time around as well, because I thought, do you know what, there's so much that goes into this that it's nice to just recognize some of the people that make it possible.
Well, I'm trying to think if there are any final last words here. There we go.
Perfect. That's your exclusive clip from the season finale.
You've heard season 3 here first. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure. Good luck in the election tomorrow.
Likewise. Thank you. I will just say for listeners, I'm not running. I'm only voting.
Write-in ballot. It's gonna be a close call. Okay, a big thank you to Tom Jurassic Fishenden for returning to the show. That was a lot of fun. So I looked into some of the dates I was mentioning. I looked into 1612. I have no idea what it had to do with anything. It didn't ring a bell for Tom because it doesn't mean anything to anyone. And I don't think London Bridge actually collapsed in the Great Fire of 1666 either. So who knows what any of those dates or memories that were stuck in my brain have to do with anything. Knowing that they mean nothing surely means I can forget about them, right? Right? All right, we're continuing our review of Spielberg's 1993 blockbuster Jurassic Park and identifying all the details the script has adapted from the novel, scene by scene, and today's scene is the Badlands. All right, so the camera cuts to a velociraptor toe claw being brushed off, and then it reveals a whole skeleton is being excavated, and the caption reads Badlands, near Snakewater, Montana. So a man is yelling, Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, we're ready to try again, and Alan says, I hate computers. And Sattler says, the feeling's mutual. And then a lead bullet gets loaded into a machine that blasts the bullet into the ground. And then the man says, you'll get a reading out of that. And the woman says, did it work? And Sattler says, how long does it usually take? And the man says, should bring immediate return. Shoot the radar into the ground. The bone bounces the image, clicks a knob, bounces it back. Computer reveals a velociraptor skeleton. The new program's incredible. A few more years development, we won't even have to dig anymore. Where's the fun in that, says Grant. It's a little distorted, but I don't think it's the computer. Look, post-mortem contraction of the posterior neck ligaments. Velociraptor? And Grant says, yes, good shape too. It's 5-6 feet high, guessing 9 feet long. Look at the extraordinary, and Grant touches the screen and it flickers. What did you do? He touched it. Grant touches the top hood of the computer experimentally, and it flickers again. Dr. Grant's not machine compatible. Hell, they got it in for me, he says. And then he adds, and look at the half-moon-shaped bones in the wrists. No wonder these guys learned how to fly. And people laugh at him. He says, no, seriously. All right, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles. Look at the pubic bones, turned backwards, just like a bird. Look at the vertebrae, full of air sacs and hollows, just like a bird. And even the word raptor means bird of prey. Doesn't look very scary, says some boy, to which people are pretty excited here. More like a 6-foot turkey, and people laugh at him. A turkey, huh? And Alan Grant grins. Oh no, here we go, says Allie. Okay, try to imagine yourself in the Cretaceous period. You get your first look at this 6-foot turkey as you enter a clearing. He moves like a bird, lightly bobbing his head, and you keep still because you think maybe his visual acuity is based on movement, like a T-Rex. He'll lose you if you don't move, but no, not Velociraptor. You stare at him, and he just stares right back, and that's when the attack comes not from the front, but from the side, from the two other raptors you didn't even know were there. Because Velociraptor is a pack hunter, he used coordinated attack patterns, and he is out in force today, and he'll slash at you with this, and he pulls the raptor claw he found, and the boy's eyes grow large with shock. 6-inch retractable claw, like a razor, in the middle toe. He doesn't bother to bite your jugular like, say, a lion. No. He slashes at you here, or here, and he pretends to slash the boy's groin. And Ellie says, oh, Alan. Or maybe across the belly, spilling your intestines. The point is, you're alive when they start to eat you. So, try to show a little respect. Okay. Okay, here's the truth. I already dug through this with a fine-tooth comb back in episode 11 plans, around the 1 hour and 15-minute mark if you'd like to revisit that. But, to recap briefly, the beginning is where the team is excavating the Velociraptor fossil, and it's derived from the chapter The Shore of the Inland Sea, which we get on page 31 of the novel. Quote, Alan Grant crouched down, his nose inches from the ground. The temperature was over 100 degrees. His knees ached, despite the rugged layers pads he wore. His lungs burned from the harsh alkaline dust. Sweat dripped off his forehead onto the ground. But Grant was oblivious to the discomfort. His entire attention was focused on the 6-inch square of earth in front of him. Working patiently with a dental pick and an artist's camel brush, he exposed the tiny L-shaped fragment of jawbone. It was only 1 inch long and no thicker than his little finger. The teeth were a row of small points and had the characteristic medial angling. Bits of bone flaked away as he dug. Grant paused for a moment to paint the bone with rubber cement before continuing to expose it. There was no question that this was the jawbone from an infant carnivorous dinosaur. Its owner had died 79 million years ago, at the age of about 2 months. With any luck, Grant might find the rest of the skeleton as well. If so, it would be the first complete skeleton of a baby carnivore. So this is not a fully articulated, complete specimen of an adult velociraptor, but instead a jaw fragment from an infant. But he's interrupted all the same. "Hey, Alan," on page 31, just like in the script. But we get, "He stood, a barrel-chested, bearded man of 40, on page 32, which isn't the same Alan Grant that we get portrayed by Sam Neill. Now, in the film, this person going, "Hey, Alan," is the voice of a volunteer, because they're using the computer-assisted sonic tomography device, or the CAST device. But in the novel, it's not a volunteer. It's Ellie calling him to come and meet what turns out to be Bob Morris from the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, instead. Now, the CAST device doesn't appear in the novel until page 55 in the chapter Plans, after they've been visited by Bob Morris, had a Procomsignathus X-ray faxed to them, and they've been invited by Hammond to visit the island over the phone, and they received a package in the mail revealing the plans for Hammond's mysterious island resort. But the CAST device performs as described in the novel. Quote, "There was a slight vibration and then yellow contour lines traced across the computer screen. This time the resolution was perfect, and Alan Grant had a glimpse of the skeleton. Beautifully defined, the long neck arched back," on page 55. And Sattler is more handsy with Grant, alluding to their romantic entanglements, which is not the state of their relationship in the novel. So in the film, she's kind of a bit more touchy. The computer produces a glimpse of a beautifully defined, perfect resolution image of the long neck and arched back of the infant velociraptor. It's suggested that the remains are imperfect, and then there's an M dash, suggesting that it's in perfect condition, but he's cut off or interrupted. And as Grant touches the screen, the same issue arises in the film. The screen goes blank. And he says, "I hate computers," squinting in the sun. What happened now? "Lost the integrator input," one of the kids says. "Just a minute." The kid bent to look at the tangle of wires going into the back of the battery-powered portable computer. They had set the computer up on a beer carton on top of Hill 4, not far from the device they call the Thumper, on page 55, we're told. Now, in the film, Grant's theory is that dinosaurs evolved into birds, whereas in the novel, he's more concerned with the theory that dinosaurs are far more active and energetic than previously believed. In the chapter Jurassic Park, on page 83, quote, "For 150 years, ever since the discovery of gigantic animal bones in Europe, the study of dinosaurs had been an exercise in scientific deduction. Paleontology was essentially detective work, searching for clues in the fossil bones and the trackways of the long-vanished giants. The best paleontologists were the ones who could make the most clever deductions. And all the great disputes of paleontology were carried out in this fashion, including the bitter debate in which Grant was a key figure about whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded. Scientists had always classified dinosaurs as reptiles, cold-blooded creatures drawing the heat they needed for life from the environment. A mammal could metabolize food to produce bodily warmth, but a reptile could not. Eventually, a handful of researchers, led chiefly by John Ostrom and Robert Bacher at Yale, began to suspect that the concept of sluggish, cold-blooded dinosaurs was inadequate to explain the fossil record. The classic deductive fashion, they drew conclusions from several lines of evidence." And then it gets wrapped up on page 66. "The warm-blooded controversy had raged for 15 years before a new perception of dinosaurs as quick-moving, active animals was accepted, but not without lasting animosities. At conventions, there were still colleagues who did not speak to one another." So, novel Grant argues for a new perception of dinosaurs as, quote, quick-moving, active animals, rather than the film Grant, who argues that it's no wonder these guys learned to fly. Now, in the novel, the kids, quote-unquote, are what Grant refers to as volunteers or students who are assisting at the dig site as described. Quote, "He saw the kids working around the jackhammer, moving away big pieces of rock after checking them for fossils," on page 32. And, quote, "On the other hill, the kids looked up with interest." Or on page 52 from the chapter Plans, quote, "This just came to me," Ellie said the next day, walking to the back of the trailer with a thick manila envelope. "One of the kids brought it back from town. It's from Hammond." Or when they were repairing the image on the computer monitor, quote, "Lost the integrator input," one of the kids said. Just a minute, on page 55. These aren't literal kids, although in the film, it's literally a kid. So it's faithful to the text too, but just a little too literally. And the terrifying rant Grant unleashes on the kid is actually a mental note he takes while reviewing the computer's output, on page 56. He saw the complete skeleton, traced in bright yellow. It was indeed a young specimen, the outstanding characteristic of Velociraptor, the single-toed claw, which in full-grown animals was a curved 6-inch long weapon capable of ripping open its prey, was in this infant no larger than the thorn on a rose bush. It was hardly visible at all on the screen, and Velociraptor was a lightly built dinosaur in any case, an animal as fine-boned as a bird, and presumably as intelligent. Here the skeleton appeared in perfect order, except that the head and neck were bent back toward the posterior. Now, the film gives us two valuable movie-specific details that are useful: that raptors hunt in packs using a decoy, which we see in Robert Muldoon's demise, and that T-Rex has a visual acuity based on movement, which helps Grant save Lex's life later on. Both pack-hunting velociraptors and a Tyrannosaurus visual acuity being based on movement are authentic to the novel. As Regis says of the raptors on page 114, quote, the females are the real hunters. They're pack hunters, you know. And Dr. Harding says on page 202, quote, dinosaurs have excellent visual acuity, but they have a basic amphibian visual system. It's attuned to movement. They don't see unmoving things well at all. Now we get the line, that doesn't look very scary, more like a 6-foot turkey. This is actually said by an attendant in the novel. It says, it doesn't look very fearsome to me, on page 57. But recall, they're looking at an infant where the outstanding characteristic of Velociraptor, the single-toed claw, which in full-grown animals 6-inch long curved weapon capable of ripping open its prey, was in this infant no larger than the thorn on a rosebush, and hardly visible at all. That's why it doesn't look very fearsome. In the novel, Grant is interrupted by a kid, which spurs him into imagining velociraptors and serves Crichton the opportunity to present this dinosaur species as a worthy villain in the book. Grant says, pound for pound, a velociraptor was the most rapacious dinosaur that ever lived. Although relatively small, about 200 pounds, the size of a leopard, velociraptors were quick, intelligent, and vicious, able to attack with sharp claws, powerful clawed forearms, and the devastating single claw on the foot. Velociraptors hunted in packs, and Grant thought it might have been a sight to see a dozen of these animals racing at full speed, leaping onto the back of a much larger dinosaur, tearing at the neck and slashing at the ribs and belly. That's on 57. In the film, Spielberg uses this quote to do the same thing, basically. Grant says, you stare at him and he just stares right back, and that's when the attack comes not from the front, but from the side. From the other two raptors you didn't even know were there, because Velociraptor is a pack hunter. He uses coordinated attack patterns, and he is out in force today. And he slashes at you with this. He pulls out the claw that he found, and the boy's eyes grow large with shock. A 6-inch retractable claw like a razor on the middle toe. He doesn't bother to bite your jugular like, say, a lion. He slashes at you here or here, or maybe across the belly, spilling your intestines. The point is, you're alive when they start to eat you. Raptors do spill intestines in the book too. Henry Wu has his intestines removed, and he's eaten alive. That is authentic to the book. In both cases, velociraptors are described as dangerous, coordinated pack hunters with deadly claws and worthy villains for our story. All right, in Koepp's first draft of this scene, it reads like this. An artist's camel hair brush carefully sweeps away sand and rock to slowly reveal the dark curve of a fossil. It's a claw. A dentist's pick gently lifts it from the place it has laid for millions of years. Pull up to reveal a group of diggers working on a large skeleton. All we see are the tops of their hats. The paleontologist working on the claw lays it in his hand. And it's Grant. 4 complete skeletons. Such a small area. The same time horizon. And then Ellie says, they died together? Grant says, the taphonomy sure looks that way. Ellie says, if they died together, they lived together. Suggests some kind of social order. Grant, mid-30s, a ragged-looking guy with intense concentration you wouldn't want to get in the way of, carefully examines the claw. Dr. Ellie Sadler, working with him, leans in close and studies it too. She paints the exposed bone with rubber cement. Ellie in her late 20s, athletic-looking. There's an impatience about Ellie, as if nothing in life happens quite fast enough for her. Her face is almost pressed up against his. She's sitting so close. Grant continued. They hunted as a team. The dismembered Tenontosaurus bone over there, that's lunch. But what killed our raptor in a lake bed, in a bunch like this? We better come up with something that makes sense. Ellie says, a drought. The lake was shrinking. Grant, excited. That's good. That's right. They died around a dried up puddle, without fighting each other. This is looking good. From the bottom of the hill, a voice shouts to them. Dr. Grant, Dr. Sadler, we're ready to try again. Grant signs and sits up, stretching his back. I guess he might sigh. It says here, sigh. Grant sighs and sits up, stretching his back. I hate computers. He shoves the claw absent-mindedly into his pocket, and he and Ellie walk toward the source of the voice. As they walk, we get our first look at the Badlands. Exposed outcroppings of crumbling limestone stretch for miles in every direction. Not a tree or bush in sight. In the dig itself, the ground is checkered with excavations everywhere. There's a base camp with 5 or 6 teepees, a flapping mess tent, a few cards, maybe that means cars, a flatbed truck with wrapped fossils loaded on it, and a mobile home. There are a dozen volunteers of all ages at work in various places around the dig. The volunteers are from all walks of life, dinosaur buffs. 3 or 4 of them have children with them, and the kids run around like in a giant sandbox. Grant, Ellie, and a volunteer walk down the hill. Grant spots a kid kicking dirt onto one of the digs. He notices and frowns. What's that kid doing? And he says to the kid, what are you doing there? You can't, just back off. This is very fragile. Are you out of your mind? Get off of that. Go find your parents. And he says to Ellie, did you see what he just did? The kid stomps away, pissed off. Kid swears at Grant, and Grant says to Ellie, "Why do they have to bring the kids?" And Ellie says, "You could hire your help, but there's 4 summers of work here with the money for one, and you say it's a learning experience, sort of a vacation. You get volunteers with kids." He and Ellie arrive on where several volunteers are clustered around a computer terminal that's set up on a table in a small tent, its flaps lashed open. Grant says to the volunteer there, "Ready to give it a shot, Jerry?" And a little girl moves a little too close to the machine. And Ellie says, "Want to watch the computer?" And gets that kid away from there. And she moves her out of Grant's way to a place that she can see. And the volunteer says, "Thumper ready?" "Ready." "Fire!" The volunteer throws a switch on the machine that looks a bit like a floor buffer. The whole thing hops up into the air as it drives a soft lead pellet into the earth with a tremendous force. There's a dull thud. The earth seems to vibrate, and all eyes turn to the computer screen. "How long does this usually take?" says Ellie. "Should be an immediate return. You shoot the radar into the ground, the bone bounces back, and the screen suddenly comes alive, yellow contour lines tracing across it in 3 waves, detailing a dinosaur skeleton." The volunteer says, "This new program is incredible. A few more years of development, you won't have to dig anymore." Grant looks at him, and his expression is positively wounded. "Where's the fun in that?" Volunteer, "It looks a little distorted, but I don't think it's the computer." Nellie shakes her head. "Post-mortem contractions of the posterior neck ligaments." "Velociraptor?" "Yes, in good shape too. 5-6 feet high. I'm guessing 9 feet long. Look at that." And he points to part of the skeleton, but when his finger touches the screen, the computer beeps at him, and the image changes, and he pulls his hand back, as if it shocked him. "What did you do?" "He touched it. Dr. Grant is not machine compatible. They've got it in for me." And a volunteer laughs and touches a different part of the screen, which brings the original image back, and Grant continues but doesn't get as close. "Look at the half-moon-shaped bone in the wrist. No wonder these guys learned to fly." And the group laughs, and Grant is surprised. Now, seriously, show of hands, how many of you have read my book? Everyone stops laughing and looks away. Ellie raises her hand supportively, and so does the volunteer in Grant's size. Great. Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than reptiles. Look at the pubic bone. It says public bone. Look at the pubic bone. It's turned backwards, just like a bird. The vertebrae, full of hollows and air sacs, just like a bird. Even the word raptor means bird of prey. Remember, that's from the very beginning of the book, too, where Dr. Bobby Carter opens up her dictionary and finds the definition. Raptor means bird of prey. So that's from the book as well. The kid steps forward and looks at the computer skeleton critically. And the kid says, "That doesn't look very scary, more like a 6-foot turkey." And everyone sort of draws in their breath and steps aside, revealing the kid standing alone. Grant turns to the kid and lowers his sunglasses and just stares at him, like he came from another planet. He strolls over to the kid and puts his arms around his shoulders in a friendly way. "Try to imagine yourself in the Jurassic period." But it also says, "Try to imagine yourself in the Cretaceous period." Looks like the author maybe didn't know which one. Ellie rolls her eyes, and then he goes through the same spiel, word for word. He takes a claw from his pocket and holds it in front of the raptor's 3-toed foot. So here you see that when he pulls out this raptor claw, it is actually one that he pulled out absent-mindedly from the dig site when they were earlier, just inches away. He's scouring it up. So this is where that tool comes from. So here we go. How is this draft drawing stuff out of the novel? Well, Dr. Alan Grant, mid-30s, a ragged-looking guy with intense concentration you wouldn't want to get in the way of. It carefully examines a claw. And this is just like in the novel from page 31. Alan Grant crouched down, his nose inches from the ground. The temperature was over 100 degrees. His knees ached, despite the rug layers pads he wore. His lungs burned from the harsh alkaline dust. Sweat dripped off his forehead onto the ground, but Grant was oblivious to the discomfort. His entire attention was focused on the 6-inch square of earth in front of him. And Ellie has to call, "Hey, Alan," more than once to get his attention. So this focus is derived from the novel well. Also, it's noted he's 40 and barrel-chested with a beard, not ragged-looking in his mid-30s. Oh well. Sattler is working with him, leans in close and studies it too. She paints the exposed bone with rubber cement, and Ellie is in her late 20s, athletic-looking. There's an impatience about Ellie, as if nothing in life happens quite fast enough for her. Quote, from the book, we're told, quote, "Ellie was wearing cut-off jeans and a work shirt tied off at her midriff. She was 24 and darkly tanned. Her blonde hair was pulled back," on page 33. The athletic part of her figure is implied when Bob Morris gapes at her in that chapter. Now, I don't think impatient is how I'd describe Sattler in the novel, but you're welcome to disagree. In fact, she's more of a rolls with the punches kind of gal. I recall when Grant says, "I hate to wait on the money men." Grant grumbles. Ellie shrugs. It goes with the job on page 63. And when Gennaro discovers that she's not a man, Ellie shakes hands with him, and Gennaro says in surprise, "You're a woman." "These things happen," she said. And Grant thought, she doesn't like him either. And that's also on page 63. So this doesn't portray an impatient youngster. So that's not quite derived from the novel, or wherever they got that from. Next, their considerations on the fossils comes from the book too. They hunted as a team. The dismembered Tenontosaurus bone over there, that's lunch. But what killed our raptors in a lake bed in a bunch like this? We better come up with something that makes sense. From the third iteration we get, actually what I was driving at, Malcolm said, was this. Is it a persuasive animal to you? Is it in fact a dinosaur? I'd say so, yes, says Grant. And the coordinated attack behavior? To be expected, Grant said. According to the fossil record, packs of velociraptors were capable of bringing down animals that weighed 1,000 pounds, like Tyrannosaurus, which could run as fast as a horse. Coordination would be required, we're told on page 119. So that is derived from the novel. That's pretty good. Another part from Koepp's first draft here, in the stage direction, we get there's a base camp with 5 or 6 teepees, a flapping mess tent, a few cars, a flatbed truck with wrapped fossils loaded on it, and a mobile home. There are a dozen volunteers of all ages work in various places around the dig. The volunteers all come from different walks of life, but they're dinosaur buffs. 3 or 4 of them have children with them, and the kids run around like they're in a giant sandbox. Is a bit dramatized, but is also similar to the novel. Quote, Grant explained that in 1978, the first year of the excavations, they had come out in North Slope octahedral tents, the most advanced available, but the tents always blew over in the wind. They tried other kinds of tents with the same result. Finally, they started putting up teepees, which were larger inside, more comfortable, and more stable in wind. They're Blackfoot teepees built around 4 poles, Grant said. CU teepees are built around 3, but this used to be Blackfoot territory, so we thought, on page 33. They spell teepee differently. The novel is T-I-P-I, where the script is T-E-E-P-E-E. I don't know which is appropriate, but they are different. And there's some great characterization that kids are at the dig site and they're pissing Grant off, and he's pissing the kids off too. But the concept in the film that Grant and kids don't get along is built nicely into this draft of the script, and I like that. Now there's a line where the volunteer says, "Fire!" and the screen suddenly comes alive and yellow contour lines trace across it in 3 waves detailing a dinosaur skeleton. And that looks exactly the same in the book, where somebody goes, "Fire!" on page 54. And there was a slight vibration, and then yellow contour lines traced across the computer screen. This time the resolution was perfect, and Ellie Grant had a glimpse of the skeleton, beautifully defined, the long neck arched back. And a note about Grant picking the raptor claw from the dig site and then using it as a prop later in the scene, kind of like a harpy knife, for lack of a better term. I like that. But especially when the claw returns later in the script, the Grant tosses it away because they don't have to dig up dinosaurs anymore. And he admits, I guess we'll just have to evolve too. It's nice to see where that claw came from. And it comes from this moment in the opening scene. All right, in the Scotch-Marmo rewrite. Exterior Badlands afternoon, lodged in the cracked earth, are the partially exposed fossilized remains of a velociraptor, a carnivorous dinosaur, widen out to a sweeping panorama of a dinosaur dig, a major excavation filled with workers, shoveling earth and stone, making measurements, taking photographs, scribbling notes, and conferring with each other. The center of all this activity is one man. In a roped-off area that circumscribes the exposed bones of the raptor is Dr. Alan Grant, head paleontologist, good-looking, late 30s, with a thick beard. Grant lies on his belly, completely absorbed in a small piece of bone. A group of 12 students, notebooks in hand, await his next sentence. Close on, the tiny bone. Grant's nose touches it. Grant brushes the bone with a toothbrush. Then he decides on a quicker way to clean it. He licks it. Excited by his discovery, he gets to his feet and addresses his students, who listen raptly. Grant, right calcaneus of an adult female raptor. Mild stress fractures. What does this tell me? Students look at each other, a tentative hand. Grant continues. Tells me that this bone connects to the navicular, which we already found articulating into the cuboid. Off-screen, and a woman shouts to him, "Dr. Grant! Dr. Grant!" It's Ellie. Grant looks up, and Dr. Sattler, late 20s, sharp-eyed, tough if she wants to be, runs like a gazelle across the arid land. Exuberant, she leaves a trail of dust behind her. She zips by a student guarding the cordoned area, and he tries to stop her. And the student says, "Sattler! Dr. Grant is thinking." Dr. Grant waves her over enthusiastically with his bone and continues. Grant, so what can we say for sure? Stress fractures in the heel. Uncertain students, Ellie arrives and immediately gets into it. Ellie, she jumps. Grant turns around to her and smiles. She's got it. Other students too. They knew this all along. Grant, right as rain, Ellie. Now why did she jump? No answer. But Ellie gives it a try. A defensive posture against a vicious, bloodthirsty T-Rex. Grant nods. Perhaps, or maybe to select the smaller, more tender leaves and the higher branches with which to suckle her young. And Ellie jumps up. I bet it was a mating ritual. And the students laughed. One student eyes Grant's self-conscious smile at Ellie. And Grant says, the science of paleontology can't answer these questions. Novelists and artists who dream of vision of the Jurassic period can attempt these questions with their imaginations. What we scientists can say is, Considering the mass and kinetic articulation of these bones, this animal had a vertical leap of about 12 feet. Not as entertaining as fiction, but absolutely fact without prejudice. Ellie intrudes again. "Excuse me, Dr. Grant, but fact is, we're late. There's a car." And she points. On the horizon, a limousine speeds towards them, leaving a dusty wake. Grant sets the rules for his departure, giving instructions individually as Ellie pulls him away, carrying their bags. Grant says, "Jim, you keep an eye making up the plaster batches. Whatever ratio you're using, it's perfect. Nora, no digging after 5. When the temperature drops, those bones get too brittle. Bill, I don't want any tourists walking over my raptor. I don't care if the governor of Montana is with them. Just you guys." Grant and Ellie continue walking, and she interrupts his continued barrage. "You know, if every scientist stuck to his methods like you, there'd be no body of theory, no quasars, no Big Bang." Grant stops at the sight of the stopped limo and freezes. Jesus, a limousine. "We're re-entering Hammond's world, that's for sure. Remind me why we're doing this, Ellie?" Ellie is gentle. She's telling him something they've discussed before. "We're leaving the raptor dig at a critical time because Gennaro is paying us $60,000 to observe some resort of Hammond's in Costa Rica, and that's enough money to keep us free of commercial affiliations for 2 summers. All right, good." Then, half kidding with Ellie, "Financial independence for fraternizing with the enemy. I'll do it." She laughs, but can't quite leave. He grabs a computer printout. "This is all they could come up with, Skip?" Skip turns the printout right side up in Grant's hand. Grant smiles. Wise guy. "All right, let's go, Ellie." Grant and Ellie board the limo amidst many goodbyes from the students, and the limo pulls away. So the setting in this is a little bit different. The center of the activity is one man in a roped-off area that circumscribes the exposed bones of the raptor, Dr. Alan Grant, the head paleontologist. He's good-looking, late 30s, with a thick beard. Again, he's not 40, but he does have a beard this time, which is similar to the novel, and he's still excavating a raptor, but it isn't an infant like in the novel. Now, Scotch-Marmo must have done some research, because naming specific toe bones instead of just calling them like tarsals or metatarsals or whatever, that's something. It tells me that this bone connects to the navicular, which we already found articulating to the cuboid. Saying that with some authority would be funny. That's some hardcore jargon. Good for her. That said, there's a lot of theorizing and teachable moments between the students and Grant, and specifically Ellie. It's a bit cringy in here, but that's how it is. And a raptor wasn't going to be suckling its youth with tender leaves because it's not a herbivore. And it equally wasn't going to be defending itself against a vicious, bloodthirsty T-Rex because they lived millennia apart from one another. So whatever research Marmo did, there's some research that she also did not do as well. However, Grant's line that paleontology, quote, "can't answer these questions," and adds, "what we scientists can say is considering the mass and kinetic articulation of these bones, this animal had a vertical leap of about 12 feet. Fact without prejudice." In a way, this is true to Grant in the novel. He says on page 394, way at the end of the book, "Since bones were all the paleontologists had, bones were what they used. Like other paleontologists, Grant had become very expert at working with bones, and somewhere along the way he had started to forget the unprovable possibilities, that the dinosaurs might be truly different animals, that they might possess behavior and social life organized along lines that were utterly mysterious to their later mammalian descendants." In other words, he freely admits that paleontology can only ever know very little about an animal and almost nothing of its behavior. However, characterizing Grant as, quote, "just the facts, ma'am," like out of Dragnet, that's not quite true either. Because as we talked about earlier in page 83, it was also mentioned earlier in the episode, for 150 years, ever since the discovery of gigantic animal bones in Europe, the study of dinosaurs had been an exercise in scientific deduction. Paleontology was essentially detective work, searching for clues in the fossil bones and the trackways of the long-vanished giants. The best paleontologists were ones who could make the most clever deductions, and all the great disputes of paleontology were carried out in this fashion, including the bitter debate, in which Grant was a key figure, about whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded. In the novel, it's not only about the facts that you can prove without prejudice, it's also about making clever deductions. Now, in this script, they're already due to meet up with Hammond. They're riding in a limo because Hammond's a big spender, and it's not mentioned in the novel how they arrive at Chateau to catch Hammond's sleek Grumman jet. But so these are all kind of inventions of Scotch-Marmo as she's coming up with a way to get our protagonists to Jurassic Park as fast as possible. And I think it's authentic that, why are they going on this expedition in the middle of an important time of their season? It's for the money. That is authentic to the novel as well. That's why they're there. Same with what Spielberg had in his final draft as well. All right, thanks to my guest today, Tom Jurassic Fishenden. I hope your next bank holiday is filled with friends, family, and fireworks. Wish you a joyous and statutory day off. And I want to thank you for joining me today. If you want to read along in the book, add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, or be a guest on the show and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me. I'm at ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, drop me a line. We can try and set something up. We can rehash, tear down, gush over, and chit-chat about any part of the book, or the movie, or also not the book, all you'd like. Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chicken's banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chicken's Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novel, that's The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com. And you can connect and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, on YouTube by searching for the Jurassic Park-Cast podcast, or on Tumblr at Mr. Rogers22, or on X at RogersRyan22.
I used to worry about what people would say, but then nobody said anything.
Thank you dearly for tuning into the Jurassic Park-Cast, Jurassic Park podcast, where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. Until next time.